Now, I did promise you that for a module on installing, that we wouldn't be spending much of our time on the actual installation itself. But in the interests of completeness, let us actually walk through how you go through installing Server 2016 using the most manual, the least automated of methods. Yeah, feel free to skip forward past this if you've done this a dozen or 1,000 times before, because really the implementation of Server 2016, the whole install here right from the actual console itself, is not all that different from what you're used to seeing in previous versions. We do click the Install Now button, which takes us then to the Startup Wizard, which gives us some limited abilities here to determine which installation option we want to use, as well as also the license key, as you can see here, and just exactly where we want to install this copy of the OS, on which drive, for example. If you have a product key, you can enter in the product key here, or you can choose to enter in the product key later. Be aware that if you do enter in that product key later, and if you don't activate this instance of the OS, well, there are certain minor features, like the abilities to disable or adjust some of the items down there in the system tray, that you just simply won't be able to do until activation completes. I will choose that I don't have a product key, so I can get here to what is really the most important of these options right here, which is where you determine which of the editions and which of the installation options that you want to choose. We have here both the standard and data center editions that we talked about before, as well as whether or not we want the desktop experience or the server core edition of either of these OSs. I will go through in showing you the installation of Server Core as well as the installation here of the graphical user interface. But here, for the purposes and what we're seeing in the recording, let's just click, for example, Server the Data Center right here, Server 2016 Data Center, and choose the next button to get us through to the next screen here in the wizard. It is safe to assume that for whatever your activities will be for this and other courses in our Server 2016 curriculum, that it may be necessary for you to actually go through creating perhaps instances of both the server core and the desktop experience installation option here of Server 2016. These may be necessary to set up maybe as templates that you then use there in your hypervisor of choice so that you have the easy abilities to clone those templates and then use them for the other demonstrations that you'll be seeing here as you work through the other curriculum here. I will choose next to get us through to the next screen here in the wizard and accept the license terms here so that we can take a look at the different kinds of installations that exist here. In most situations where you're just installing right onto a basic and empty hard disk, you'll be choosing the custom install down here at the bottom. The only situation where you'll find yourself in an upgrade is where you literally are installing a copy of Server 2016 atop some other instance or some other OS version that already exists on this piece of equipment. We have here a basic machine. This is a virtual machine that we're working with. It has an empty hard drive. So let's choose our custom install here, where we can determine exactly which hard disk we want to install this copy of the OS onto. Now, in the virtual world, where you're dealing with a hypervisor, like in my case here, VMware Workstation, or if you're dealing with a Hyper-V that exists there on top of your copy of Windows 10, in all likelihood, the hard disks and hard disk controllers that you're working with will automatically just function here with the default installation like what you see here. But in some situations, when you're dealing with actual hardware itself, the drivers to get access to those disks may not be part of the default installation of Windows itself. When that's the case, you may need to load the driver for that hard drive by choosing the Load Driver option down here. In choosing that option, I can choose to browse down here to wherever the driver files may exist. I don't have any driver files here because, again, we are working within this hypervisor. But your manufacturer for the hardware you're working with should provide the necessary device drivers so that you can actually then attach up to the hard disk controller and the hard disks that you want to install Windows onto. I'll choose next down here because we don't actually have any device drivers to install, or actually close the box right here. And then fast forwarding things just a bit because closing that down takes us all the way back to the beginning of the install. Back here on our Windows setup screen is where we can go through determining how we want to partition that hard disk once we've correctly enabled the access to it. You can see here that I've assigned a 256 gig hard disk to this machine right here, but I could partition that disk by choosing New down here to create a new partition there inside that disk. I could choose also to format the disk if I have various drives that I want to format right here during the installation itself. Or I could choose to later on format those drives after I complete the install. In our situation, we'll assume that we have only a single C drive, so a single drive that we want to install the OS onto, and no other drives that we really need to work with. If I then choose Next, that really brings us then to, as you can see, the install itself. This install really automates all the further components, all the further configurations that need to happen in getting those bits onto this virtual machine to create that copy of Windows Server 2016. Now again, for your purposes, for this course and potentially for other courses here, you may want to consider actually repeating this process both for Server Core as well as for that full version of the operating system, that desktop experience installation option. This will give you the abilities to use those as templates for the virtual machines that you'll later be creating for all the other demonstrations that you may wish to follow along with. I will assume from this point on that you've completed both of these tasks in creating those templates, because from this point we're going to be creating some other virtual machines that we'll be using to further the configuration of these servers and services as we get through this course.